Joshua chapter 6. This morning we're going to look at a few verses here. We talked about Jericho a couple weeks ago. Pastor preached from Joshua 7, and I was afraid that he was going to mention part of what I'm preaching on this morning because we're kind of going to take a few chapters from the book of Joshua. We're not going to read them all. That would take a little bit of time because some of them are a little long. But we're going to take a few of the stories, and we'll look at a couple different things and kind of make some applications that I think will be very practical to us and very important for us as we go forward as we serve the Lord in our Christian life. So we're going to look at Joshua chapter 6. We're going to read verses 12 through 16. This is talking about them actually walking around Jericho. This is where we're picking the story up this morning. But we're going to read these verses, and then we're going to pray and then get into our message this evening. But Joshua chapter 6, verses 12 through 16. If you would just follow along with me this morning as I read Joshua 6, starting verse number 12. And it says, "And Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord, and the seven priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord went on continually and blew with the trumpets, and the armed men went before them, but the reward came after the ark of the Lord, the priests going on and blowing with trumpets. And the second day they came past the city once and returned into the camp. So they did 6 days. And it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose early about the dawning of the day, and came past after the city the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they came past the city 7 times. And it came to pass at the 7th time, when the priests blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, Shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this day. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to meet with our church family, Lord, and have a time where we can learn from your word. Lord, I pray that you take what is said this morning, and I pray that you use it to challenge us, that you use it to help us better serve you and live a victorious Christian life. Lord, not just a lazy Christian life, but Lord, a life that is dedicated to serving you and going forward for you and reaching our community and reaching the world for you. I pray that you bless now what is said. Be with me as I preach, Lord. I pray that you guide my mind, guide my thoughts, guide my tongue, Lord, and help me to say what you would have me to say. I pray that you bless now this time. In Jesus' name, amen. As you can see, this morning we're talking on the subject, or the title of the message rather would be Take the City. And that phrase at the end of verse 16 of Joshua 6, it says, Shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. By way of introduction this morning, we're going to look at some cities that we see here in this book and what they represent for us. But we know, as we read the book of Joshua, that they've just now crossed over Jordan. And this is the first battle at Jericho, the first battle that they fought inside of Canaan land. And we know there's many songs that talk about Canaan, crossing Jordan into Canaan as a picture of heaven. And although there is an application there of crossing Jordan like that, but we see that in Canaan there was still trials, there was still sin, there was still struggles and tribulation. So we see that Canaan not as representative in the book of Joshua as heaven, but rather a victorious Christian life, or the Christian life in general. And we see here that they encounter different cities that pose different obstacles to them. And these cities can be representative of things for us in our Christian life as well. I believe each one of them has a little bit different meaning to the children of Israel in this book. And I believe that we can take what they learned from them and apply them to our lives as well. So if you allow me this morning, I'm going to take several of these cities. We're going to look at 4 of them. Just by way of introduction, and see what they represent and how it would be, what they would oppose in our lives, what they would kind of put in our way. So let's look at these 4 cities quickly by introduction, and then we're going to learn this morning how we can take the city, how we can overcome these difficulties and these obstacles, these trials that are in our way. We see first Jericho in Joshua chapter 6 and verse number 17, where it takes, picking up where we just left off, we see first the city of sin. A city of sin. We see it says, and the city shall be accursed. The city shall be accursed. What do we know of accursed things? We know that we know that sin is accursed. We know that there are things that happen when we do these things in our lives that is an accursed thing. Sin is an accursed thing. The city shall be accursed. Sin is a city we all face and we must defeat. We see the city of sin is a city that we're going to come up against, and many times it's a city that, just like the children of Israel, as soon as we enter into our Christian life, we're like, okay, I'm going to go forward for the Lord. I'm going to serve the Lord and be victorious. It's usually the first obstacle that we must defeat, because perhaps we've just gotten saved, or we've just dedicated our lives to serving the Lord, and so we realize that there's things that we're going to have to defeat in our lives. And the first one is normally sin. We say, hey, I got to get this sin out of my life. So we see Jericho as a city of sin, but we see Jericho as something else. In Joshua chapter 7, verse number 1, it says, but the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing, for Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, took of the accursed thing, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against the children of Israel. Not only do we see Jericho as a city of sin, we also see it as a city of self. What did we see here Achan doing? And you folks know the story, so we're not going to read all of chapter 7, but we know that Achan took of the silver and the gold and of the Babylonish garment. He took them and he hid them. Why? Because of the pride that he had. He even says he saw them. He saw the goodly Babylonish garment. He saw the silver and the gold, and he saw those, and he wanted them. And so he took them, and I'm afraid that this city is a city that really trips us up. The city of self is a hard city to defeat. But notice, what does Joshua tell the people? It says, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. We see this city of self is still representative of Jericho, the specific city he's talking about. And this city, I believe, is a city that we must, as Christians, say, hey, I'm going to defeat the city of self. I'm going to defeat the self. I'm going to see things that are going to look nice. I'm going to see the gold, the silver. I'm going to see the clothes, and I'm going to see the world, the flesh, and the devil trying to take me and pull me away. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, trying to draw me away from what I'm supposed to be doing. But I must defeat the city of self. Achan took from Jericho, took of the accursed thing because of his pride and because of self. He wanted to please self. We see Jericho, the city of sin. Jericho also the city of self. And next we see in verses 4 and 5 of chapter 7, a city of setback in Ai. Look at verses 4 and 5 with me of Joshua 7. It says, so there went up thither of the people about 3,000 men, and they fled before the men of Ai. And the men of Ai smote of them about 36 men, for they chased them from before the gate even to Cherubim, and smote them in the going down, wherefore the hearts of the people melted and became as water. Notice this is a city of setback. This is a city of they thought they were going forward for the Lord, and because of the cities of sin itself that they had already passed by, they came to this next city, Ai, and they said, hey, we got this. We just defeated Jericho. It was a big city, big thick walls, and so you could race chariots on top of the walls of Jericho. And we walked around it. We didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to pull out our swords or anything. The walls fell, and we just took over the city. And Ai is just a little tiny city compared to that. We got this. And they went up, but because of the sin of one man, they were defeated. And we see a setback that took place in the lives of the children of Israel. And we see here that many times we as Christians will go through these setbacks as well. Many times, just like Israel, it's because of sin or because of ourselves. But these setbacks come nonetheless. We all encounter setbacks in our lives, and as I said, from sin itself generally, but these need to be defeated. A lot of times people will let one thing, maybe something that happened because maybe they were doing something wrong and the Lord kind of got their attention. You know, when I say that, I'm sure you all know what I mean, but something happened in their lives and the Lord is trying to get their attention, and they let that one thing be the defining moment of their Christian life, right? They say, I'm gonna live my life on that, and that setback is gonna just keep me from serving the Lord. But the fact is that once we get that sin taken care of and we realize that, hey, self doesn't need to be served, and we can get past those setbacks as well. So we see a city of sin, a city of self, a city of setback. And then if we jump over to chapter 8, there's a little bit bigger passage that I want to read, but I think this is another city that I think is very important for us to realize. I think this is one that's a little more, subtle, because it's the city of subtlety. Look at chapter 8, verses 3 through 15. A little bit bigger passage, but I think it'll be very important. It'll make sense as we get into the message this morning. It says, so in Joshua 8, starting verse number 3, so Joshua arose and all the people of war to go up against Ai. And Joshua chose out, I'm sorry, that's my wrong passage. I have the wrong thing written down, but nonetheless, I believe chapter 9 is where we want to be. Chapter 9, verses 3. I'm sorry. Chapter 9, it's starting in verse number 3. It says, and when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, They did work willingly and went and made as if they had been ambassadors and took old sacks upon their asses and wine bottles, old and rent and bound up, and old shoes and clouded upon their feet, and old garments upon them, and all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy. And they went to Joshua into the camp of Gilgal and said unto him and to the men of Israel, Lo, we be come from a far country. Now therefore make ye a league with us. And the men of Israel said unto the Hivites, Peradventure ye dwell among us, and how shall we make a league with you? And they said unto Joshua, We are thy servants. And Joshua said unto them, Who are ye, and from whence come ye? And they said unto him, From a very far country thy servants are come because of the name of the Lord thy God. For we have heard the fame of him, and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites which were beyond Jordan, to Sihon king of Heshbon, to Og king of Bashan, which was at Asherah. Wherefore our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spake to us, saying, Take victuals with you for the journey, and go to meet them, and say unto them, We are your servants, therefore now make ye a league with us. This is our bread which we took for our provision out of the house on our day that we came forth to go unto you. But now, behold, it is dry and it is moldy, and these bottles of wine which were filled were new, and behold, they be rent, and these are garments, and our shoes are become old by reason of the very long journey. And the men took their victuals, and asked not counsel of the mouth of the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them, and made a league with them to let them live, and the princes of the congregation swear unto them. Notice we see here Gibeon is a city that really would have been one of the next cities that Joshua and the children of Israel would have come to. And when they saw what had happened to Jericho and Ai, we saw that there in the first verse that we read, they said, we don't want that to happen to us. So they made this wonderful plan, and really it was quite a good plan on their part, because they made themselves look like they had been on a long journey, and they took some old bread, and they took some old bottles of wine, and they went and they said, we've been on a long journey, and we want to serve you, and we want to serve the Lord, so we want to make a league with you. And if we read down through this chapter, we see that they did successfully make this league, and then when Joshua and the children of Israel came to these cities, they weren't able to overtake them because of this league. Now we see here that that's why I call this the city of subtlety. Satan is very subtle. Sin is very subtle. More subtle than we will ever know. I truly believe that we don't even know the half of the things that Satan can do, and the half of the things that Satan puts in front of us that we don't even know it's from Satan. We're just like, oh, that's nice, you know. Satan is very subtle. He subtly often leads us to the city of sin or self or to setbacks. Because we're in this city of subtlety that we haven't defeated, because we don't even realize its problem. We don't realize how bad it actually is. He leads us back to these cities of sin. He says, hey, come with me. I'm the city of subtlety. I'm going to lead you back to the city of sin. I'm going to lead you back to the city of self. I'm going to, because of that, you're going to see these setbacks come into your lives. So we see these four cities: the city of sin, the city of self, the city of setback, the city of subtlety, and it's great for us to know these cities. We say, hey, we need to defeat sin, we need to defeat self, we need to be on guard against the subtlety of Satan, we need to make sure that we're not letting setbacks keep us from serving God. But I want to go farther than that. This morning I want to help us. How can we take those cities? Remember what Joshua said, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And I think this morning we need to look at these cities and say, hey, I can defeat this city. You might be looking at a city of sin saying, hey, there's something in my life, there's something in my heart that I know shouldn't be there. There's a sin in my life that I know shouldn't be there. But I don't know how to defeat it. I don't know how to get past it. I don't know how to defeat this city in my life. Or maybe it's self. Maybe you say, man, I love pleasing self. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. I'm always drawn away by self, looking at the things that I know I shouldn't have, or whatever it may be. Maybe there's a city of setbacks. You say something in my past. I keep, every time someone says something, I say, oh, well, that happened, or I'm defined by one moment, one bad decision, or one thing that happened to me in my past. That city of setback. Or maybe it's the city of subtlety. And that's a tough one because it's subtle, right? We need to be very in tune with these things that we're going to look at in order to defeat that city. Because if we let the city of subtlety stand, then it will inevitably lead us back to the other cities. And we may have already defeated them, but we're going to go back to them and start helping them build the walls back up. So we're going to look at 5 things this morning, and I don't plan on being too awful long, but we're going to look at these 5 things that I think will help us. That will help us defeat these cities. We can take the city, and we can destroy the city, and we can live a victorious Christian life. We can march on into Canaan land in our Christian life and go marching forward and not be tied down with these cities that we say, oh, I marched around this Jericho 7 times and I keep marching around it and I can't seem to defeat it. Well, if we follow these principles this morning, I believe we'll be able to. How can we take the city? This morning, the first and by far the most important thing we need to do is recognize the captain. If you would turn to Joshua chapter 5. Joshua chapter 5. Look at verse number 13 through 15 with me. We pick up right here that they come over Jordan, obviously, and the spies have gone into Jericho, and they've come out, and they kind of have an idea of what's going on in Jericho. And they know that it's a great city, great walls, and it's a very fortified city. And so Joshua's going out, I believe, kind of to do a survey trip, so to speak, of the city and kind of get alone with God and see what they need to do. Joshua is a wonderful leader. I love the book of Joshua to see how God used a younger man, someone who was Moses' servant, to lead and to finish the work that Moses had started, leading them into the promised land. But he was out there and he finds someone that he doesn't know who he is. And we see here in verse 13, if you pick it up, I'm reading with me, and it says that it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with a sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him and said unto him, Art thou for us, or for our adversaries? And he said, Nay, but as captain of the host of the Lord am I now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and did worship, and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? And the captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, Loose thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place whereon thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so. Notice here that we must recognize the captain. I love this picture because, as I said, Joshua's out, perhaps taking a military survey trip of of Jericho, and he's there by the city, and he sees someone standing off with a sword in his hand. He goes over to him and he says, Hey, are you for us or for our enemies? And I love the answer. He says, Are you for us or for our enemies? Are you on our side or on their side? He says, No. I'm the captain of the Lord's host. I'm the captain of the host of the Lord. Hey, it doesn't matter if I'm on your side or on their side. All that matters is if you're on my side. And I think we as Christians today get so caught up with, are we on the right side or are they on the wrong side? And I think it's very important that we realize it doesn't matter if we're on the right side as long as we're on the Lord's side, then we are on the right side. It doesn't matter if we're on the side that everyone thinks is right. It doesn't matter if we're on the side that is socially acceptable as right. All that matters is we're on the Lord's side. And he says, no, I'm not on your side. I'm not on their side. I'm the one who sets the sides. I'm the one, you're either on my side or you're not. Right? And we as Christians, we must recognize the captain. I'm afraid many times the reason that we can't defeat the cities of sin, self, setback, of subtlety is because we're not even looking to the captain. We're saying, I can do this. I can beat this city. I can defeat this city. I can do what I'm supposed to do. And if I work hard enough, if I live right enough, if I do enough, then I can defeat these cities. No. He said, nay, I'm the captain of the host of the Lord. We need to be looking at him. Not just saying, hey, how can we strategically defeat this city? Not like going out and looking at this. We need to make sure that we are on the Lord's side. He is the captain. The same captain who was captain of the host of the Lord in Joshua's time is the same captain today. He's the same yesterday and today and forever. Not on our side, not on their side. We need to be on his side. And so one thing, last summer there was a protest in Michigan City, and the chief of police was asked whose side he was on. Right? If he was on the one side who was protesting or on the other side, and he said, all I care is that I'm on God's side. And I really like that kind of a quote, kind of a little bit of a play on a quote from Abraham Lincoln from the Civil War, saying that he only was concerned if he was on God's side. And I think that's very important for us, and it's fine for a political leader to say, I want to be on God's side. But let me ask you this morning as a Christian, have you recognized the captain? Do you recognize him as the captain at least? You say, oh, I'm saved, I recognize him as a captain. And by the way, that is the most paramount thing. If you're going to live a victorious Christian life, you must first be a Christian. Right? And that's the first part of recognizing the captain. We must recognize him for salvation. Realize he is the one who brings that salvation. He's the one who gave his life for us so that we could have eternal life. And once we've recognized him as that, make sure that he is the captain of us, the captain of the way that we're walking. He's the one leading. He's the captain. He's the one in control. We must recognize the captain this morning. That's the first step in taking the city. Notice, if Joshua would have just tried to come up with some military strategy, it may not have worked. But he recognized who was in control. And he recognized that if he was going to if he was going to defeat the cities that they needed to defeat, he was going to have to listen to God. And then we see also, it kind of leads us to our next point, but if we recognize the captain, we must also remember the commands. We must remember the commands. Look at the end of verse number 15 we just read. It says, and Joshua did so. And then in chapter 12, the verses that we read, it says, and Joshua rose early in the morning, or chapter 6 rather, verse 12, and Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord, and it continues down through here and talks about how they did exactly what the Lord told them to do. But notice it started all the way back in verse 15 when the Lord told Joshua, hey, you're standing on holy ground, take your shoes off. And what is it? And Joshua did so. But I believe that if we're going to remember the commands, if we're going to do what God has told us to do, we must realize who we're talking to. We must realize who gave us this book. When we read this and we say, oh man, we see we're supposed to do something, if we're going to live by what this book tells us to do, we must realize who gave it to us. Right? We must first recognize the captain, and then we must remember the commands. Pastor Pirate song says, O-B-E-D-I-N-C-E. Obedience is the very best way to show that you believe. Right? That obedience is how we show that we believe. That's how, when the world looks at us and says, hey, he's a Christian because he's obeying what God has told him to do. That's how other Christians tell you're a Christian as well, if they see you doing what God has told you to do. We must remember the commands. A blatant disregard of the commands of God will not result in defeating the cities that we need to defeat. Let me say that again. A blatant disregard for the commands of God will not result in taking the city. If we're not going to do what God told us to do, we're not going to have victory in our lives. If we're not going to do the things that God has told us from His Word that we should do, we're not going to be able to defeat sin. We're not going to be able to defeat self. We're not going to be able to get past the things that are in our past. We're not going to be able to figure out where the devil's trying to get us to trip up. We're not going to be able to do that because God has told us in our lives or in His Word how we're supposed to live our lives. We see that we need to recognize the captain. We need to remember the commands that He has given us. In verse number 7, or chapter number 7, rather, in verse 16, we see our next point. Once we recognize the captain, once we remember the commands that He has given us, we must also remove the corruption. Remove the corruption. Look at chapter 7, verse number 16. We're going to read verses 16 down through 26. A familiar passage once again talking about Achan. It says, so Joshua rose up early in the morning and brought Israel by their tribes, and the tribe of Judah was taken. And he brought the family of Judah, and he took the family of the Zerahites, and he brought the family of the Zerahites man by man, and Zabdi was taken, and he brought of his household man by man, and Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, was taken. And Joshua said unto Achan, my son, give, I pray thee, glory to the Lord God of Israel, and make a confession unto him, and tell me now what thou hast done. Hide it not from me. And Achan answered Joshua and said, indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and thus have I done. When I saw among the spoils a goodly Babylonish garment and 200 shekels of silver and a wedge of gold of 50 shekels weight, then I coveted them and took them. And behold, they are hid in the earth in the midst of my tent, and the silver under it. So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran unto the tent, and behold, it was hid in the tent, and the silver under it. And they took them out of the midst of the tent, and brought them unto Joshua and unto all the children of Israel, and laid them out before the Lord. And Joshua and all Israel took him and took Achan, the son of Zerah, and the silver, and the garment, and the wedge of gold, and his sons and his daughters, and his oxen, and his asses, and his sheep, and his tent, and all that he had, and brought them unto the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, why hast thou troubled us? The Lord shall trouble thee this day. And all Israel stoned him with stones and burnt them with fire after they had stoned them with stones. And they raised over him a great heap of stones unto this day. So the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger, wherefore the name of that place was called the Valley of Achor unto this day. We see that we must remove the corruption. We see here Israel. And as I said, these are all very familiar stories to us. And Pastor just preached on this just 2 or 3 weeks ago. But we see here that Achan had taken the things from Jericho that he ought not take. We know that part of the story. We know how he hid it. We know how that they found out. Joshua was talking to the Lord, and the Lord said, hey, there's sin in the camp. You need to get up and take care of this. And we know how Joshua went out. We just read how Joshua went out and took them and brought them forth and found that it was Achan, and Achan told him what he did, and then they stoned him and burnt him with fire. And we know all of this, the story. But let me ask you a question. We see how this is important for the children of Israel, right? It set them back. It made them lose the next battle they face and all of this. But let me ask you, how many times do we do the same thing? Maybe we're starting to get victory over the city of sin. And then we see something and we let the city of self take us back and say, oh, well, I'm just going to take this little thing. I'm going to keep this little bit for myself. And then we have trouble after trouble. I'm like, why can't I get ahead? Why can't I go forward for God? Why can't I get victory over this in my life? Maybe it's because we haven't removed the corruption from our life. Maybe it's because, hey, we see God, we've recognized the captain, we've surrendered to Him. We're saved and we're surrendered. We dedicated to serve Him, and we even know the commands. We're remembering them. We're saying, okay, God wants me to do this and this and this. But there's something in our lives that we won't get rid of. There's something in our lives that we're holding on to. It's that Babylonish garment, right? We have it hid under our tent in our heart. We have it hid there. We have that silver and that gold in there. And we say, okay, I'm going to have this in here. I'm going to keep this because this is the one thing that I'm going to have. And we've stole from God, and we've in this sense, and we've taken from what we're supposed to, from what God has told us, and we've done what we're not supposed to do. We violated the command of God, and there's that corruption in our heart, and we won't get rid of it. We won't remove it. We won't push it to the side and say, you know what, God, you can have the gold. You can have the silver. You can have the garment. All I want to do is be able to defeat these cities that are keeping me from walking with you. Let me encourage you this morning that we need to remove the corruption. If we're going to go forward for God, if we're going to see revival, if we're going to live victoriously, if we're going to see folks won to Christ, if we're going to serve God faithfully, we must remove the sin and the corruption that is in our lives. If my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked way. It says then He'll hear from heaven, He'll hear from heaven, He'll heal our land. But notice it says we must turn from our wicked way. He's talking to His people, my people called by my name. We must turn from our wicked way. Christian, if we're going to keep sin in our life, if we're going to hold sin in our heart and say, I'm not going to let this go, then we're not going to see revival in our lives. And if we're not going to see revival in our lives, we're not going to see revival in our church. And if we don't see revival in our church, it's going to be very difficult for us to see revival in the world. We must remove the corruption. We must get that sin out. If there's a sin in your life that you're holding on to, I pray that you say, God, you can have it. I don't want it anymore. And maybe it's a difficult thing, and I understand that sometimes if you've had something, it's hard to just say, oh, you know what? No, I don't want it anymore. But we must remove the corruption lest we keep fighting the same battle over and over. We keep going up to AI and charging AI and having to retreat, and men are dying, and we keep going up to AI and we keep having to retreat. Because if they would have just kept trying to do that over and over again at AI, what would have happened, you think? They probably just would have kept getting beaten, gotten beaten. But what God told them to do, He said, you got to remove the corruption. You have to get the sin out. You must get the sin out of your life. You must remove the corruption from your heart. Next we see, once we remove the corruption, we must also regain the courage. We must regain our courage. In Joshua chapter 8 and verse number 1, this is when God is telling them to go back up to Ai. It says, and the Lord said unto Joshua, fear not, neither be thou dismayed. Take all the people of war with thee, and arise, go up to Ai. We see that this continues, and it's a great story it's really a great military story too. I love reading how they kind of go up and they pretend like they're retreating, and then they come and take the city. Very interesting to me, but nonetheless, we must regain our courage. Notice in Joshua chapter 1 and verse number 9, it says, be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. At the end of that chapter, verse number 18, it says, be strong and of a good courage. In this verse it says, fear not, neither be thou dismayed. I'm afraid that there are far too many cowardly Christians. That the reason that we won't defeat the cities of sin, self, setback, and subtlety in our lives is because we're just too afraid to take them on. What does the Lord say? That He'll be with us wherever we go. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. In Joshua chapter 1, verse 9, it says, be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. Why? For the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. We have no reason to be afraid. We have no reason to be scared of the cities. Now, you might look at it and be like, wow, that is a big city. That is a Jericho-sized city in my life. That sin is just a big thing that I know I need to get rid of. I don't know how I'm going to do it. But God says, hey, be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. Now, I'm with you wherever you go. If you're going to take that city, I'll be right there with you. If you see me as the captain, if you see God as the captain, you look at Him, you see the commands that He told you to do, you've gotten that corruption out, then you need to take courage and charge the city so you can take it for Him. There are far too many Christians who don't have the courage that they need. We need to regain our courage so that we can fight. And if we're going to take the cities in our lives, if we're going to take those cities standing between us and a victorious Christian life, we're going to have to have some courage. Over and over, Paul tells Timothy to have courage, fight a good fight, be a good soldier. He tells him these things because why? It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be a walk in the park. It's not always sunshine and roses and green grass. You know, it's not always just a beautiful, picture-perfect day when you're living the life of a Christian. No, it's tough sometimes. The life of a Christian can be very difficult, but we need to have courage. We need to say, hey, it might not be easy, but I'm sure that God is with me. And so I know I can be courageous and take this city. We must regain our courage. And lastly this morning, we see that we need to re-engage in the conflict. We need to re-engage in the conflict. In Joshua chapter 9, the passage that we read about Gibeon coming and making a league with Joshua, and there's something to be learned here, I believe, for us, because they made a league with someone they shouldn't have made a league with. Right? The Lord did not, and notice, it says that they didn't ask counsel of the mouth of the Lord. They asked not counsel of the mouth of the Lord, verse number 14, chapter 9. They made a league, they made an alliance with someone that they shouldn't have. And that's why I call it the city of subtlety, because many times the Satan lets something creep into our lives, and we let the subtlety of sin and the subtlety of Satan creep in and kind of lull us to sleep. Say, well, it's not that bad, or, well, we've lived with it this long, or it's only fill in the blank. And it's something so subtle. And unfortunately, the children of Israel, when they came to those cities, they couldn't take them over. It says that they dwell with them to this day, and things like that, things of that nature. They couldn't take those over. And I'm afraid that we've kind of done the same thing with our sin or with self in our lives. We say, oh, well, I've kind of made a league with it. I've made an alliance with this sin. I can't beat it all. It's only this, whatever it is. It's only my pet sin, fill in the blank. Well, I don't really need to get that out, but the fact is that we as Christians, we've kind of done the same thing, and like the children of Israel, we say, well, I can't fight that sin. It's been in my life for so long, I don't know, like, how am I going to defeat it? But the fact is that we as Christians, we don't have the same rule where if we make an alliance with our sin, that doesn't mean that we can't defeat it. We make an alliance with our sin, we need to realize that we need to re-engage in the conflict. We say there's a sin in our life, there's self in our life, there's something that's holding us back. We need to re-engage. We need to start fighting once again. Once we've regained our courage, then we can start doing that. We must re-engage in the conflict against these cities. We must stand and fight to overcome them, to overtake the cities of sin, of self, of setback, and of subtlety. We see these cities that represented in these cities that we see in the book of Joshua, and I'm afraid that because of our lack of courage, because of the subtlety that Satan has, we don't even realize the terrible detriment that it is having these cities in front of us. We don't even realize how bad it is to have the city of sin standing between us and a victorious Christian life. But I believe that if we'll take the first step to defeating that city, we'll realize, wow, I really need to get this out of the way so I can get closer to God. I believe that if we took the first step in defeating the city of self, we'll realize, hey, I need to get this out of the way so I can get closer to God. The same with those setbacks. And there's something to be said for getting past something that maybe something terrible happened in your past. Maybe you did something terrible in your past, and you keep turning back and say, well, I did this, so I can't go forward for God. But there's something to be said for someone who says, you know what, I'm going to just give that to God. I'm just going to let that city go. Let that city, I know that's a city in front of me. I know that's a city that needs defeated. I'm going to need some courage. I'm going to need to re-engage with that so I can go forward and defeat that city so I can get closer to God. We need to recognize these points. We need to think about these things. We need to first recognize the captain. This morning, if you're not saved and you haven't recognized him for salvation, I beg you, please make today that day where you accept Christ and turn to him for salvation. And if you have, I beg you also to look to him as the captain, the one who is in charge, the one who wants to be in charge of your life, who can give you the victory. Then we must remember his commands. Look at his word. See what he's told us to do. Start following them. And then inevitably we'll find when we're following his commands that there's going to be some corruption that needs removed. We must remove the corruption. Then we must regain the courage. Have courage to go forward. Remember, I'll be with you wherever you go. Have courage to go forward and then re-engage in the conflict. Once we've done these things, once we see God as captain, once we see what we're supposed to be doing in his word, once we've removed the corruption from our lives, then it becomes much more easy to regain that courage. Say, God's with me, and then say, I'm going to fight. I'm going to take these cities. Church, if we're going to go forward for God, if we're going to do something great for God, if we're going to grow closer to him in our personal lives, if we're going to grow closer to him as a church, if we're going to be able to reach the world, then we're going to have to go forward. And if we're going to go forward, that means we're going to have to defeat these cities. We're going to have to defeat the city of sin. I think all of us would say, well, yeah, sin is bad, right? But the fact is that if we believe that, we must get it out of our lives. We must defeat that city of sin. We must defeat the city of self. Say, I'm going to sacrifice self on the altar of being able to serve God. I'm going to sacrifice self on the altar of being able to be closer to God. I'm going to sacrifice self on the altar of being able to have a victorious Christian life. And then once we do that, get past the city of setbacks, and then defeat the city of subtlety that Satan so easily creeps into our lives we don't even recognize it. But if we defeated the other cities, it's easier to recognize that coming into our lives so that we can ask the Lord to help us defeat that as well. We must take the city. Let me encourage you to stand and fight to take these cities so that you can go forward for God. These cities stand between us and a victorious Christian life. And in life where we can go forward, we can do something for the Lord. So I encourage you this morning, take the city. Stand up and fight. And take the cities that are in our way.